All right, people, we're back. Week 2, episode 4. Gotta correct myself there. This is not like House of the Dragon. Amazon loves to do that where they drop the first 3 episodes and then do the next couple. And we are on episode 4 of season 4 of The Boys, entitled Wisdom of the Ages. Eli, you ready to break this episode down?
Oh, I'm always ready to break it down. I love The Boys.
Yes, indeed. And the boys love you so much. All of that and more on tonight's episode of the Talking TV podcast, The Boys Recap.
You do.
All right, guys, we are back. Season 4, episode 4. Crazy, we're already halfway through the season, and it's only been 2 weeks, but that's usually how these things like to go. Wrapping up a couple of the ancillary storylines that were set up in the first 3 episodes, now getting into what could potentially be the setup for the end game as we continue towards it. So, Eli, before we get started with what actually happened, going into this episode, based off of what last week's episodes, I should say, left us off with, did you expect or anticipate anything going into this at all?
Frankly, I thought the overall story of the season had been progressing pretty slowly up until this point. Frankly, I think it's still a lot more happened in this episode than initially I thought looking back on it. But yeah, like you said, I think it's definitely we're still very much in the setup phase of the season. I have a feeling that we're building to something pretty big, especially with the end of this episode, which we'll get into in just a moment. But they keep dropping little hints. Obviously, we had a little bit of a plug-in from Gen V this episode too, which
Yes, we did.
we're finally going to get tied into the Godolphin virus. I'm very interested to see how they end up tying that into this season. So
yes, indeed, especially given that, like I said, we saw in the trailer that Sam and Maddie, I believe her name is, are in this season of The Boys. And like I said, we got our first, like you mentioned, we got our first little mention in the news clipping where they mentioned that the 4 survivors from Godolphin, that being Marie, Emma, Andre, and Jordan, are all kind of in prison. So we got that little tidbit right there. But so this is another, and last week kind of set us up for it, but it's like I like to call season 2 of The Boys. There was a lot of, like I call, the Homelander solo episodes, which is basically where Homelander goes off on his own, usually to a place of where he's like reconnecting or going back to his past once again. And yeah, it usually results in some absolutely bloody, crazy violence, but here's the thing, right? I'm starting to get a little sick of them. And the reason for that is because they're starting to get a little bit repetitive. And at this point in the course of the show, there's not necessarily anything new that I can glean from it other than, okay, he's just getting crazier. Like, okay, tell me something I didn't already know. Season 2 ended with him literally jacking off just to the whole city, like.
Fun fact, I actually recently just learned about that clip. That was the only clip they didn't use from season 1. That was actually something they had filmed for season 1, but they weren't sure that Amazon was going to allow that to be put in. Which
there are a couple of those moments that went out. Yeah, so I guess just kind of in terms of like some of the problems that I had with Frenchie and Kimiko last week, it feels more like padding and just like putting stuff in there in order to pad out time, so that we can.
I agree.
Yes, that we could like, okay, we need to pace this out, and kind of what I'm talking about. Homelander goes back to the lab where they basically built him. Some of the scientists from when he was a kid are still there, and he basically proceeds to spend the entire time just torturing them, just torturing them brutally, making them relive some of the past torments that they put onto him. And like I said, other than, okay, he's torturing more people, he's inevitably going to kill them all, and he's going to be covered in blood at the end, It's always interesting to me, like, whenever we run into characters that, like, he does have a strange respect for, like, obviously, like, there was, like, the fact that he didn't straight up kill Stan Edgar and instead, like, just ousted him from Vought last season. The fact that that even after, Vogelbaum lied to him, he still only paralyzed him. He didn't kill him. And then we get this scientist, Barbara, also, that comes in and talks to him and tries to get him to stop ultimately. I mean, like I said, it's nothing that we really haven't seen before. And I ultimately am kind of a little bit let down when I mean the rest of the storyline certainly seem to be progressing, but it's like, oh, we need to pad out time, you know? It's like there's not
Yeah.
a lot of episodes to begin with here. It's only 8 episodes a season.
Yeah, I feel like that at least a couple of the plot lines pretty I mean we talked about this last week, but especially with the Frenchie and Huey side plots, I feel like have been well, at least we're getting some sort of payoff with the Huey plot line, but especially with Frenchie's, I just don't know if how when they're gonna tie this into the overarching story. I'm sure, like I trust the writers. I mean, I've rarely have I ever been let down by an episode of The Boys, but it does feel like that. I don't know how to say it, but there's probably maybe a little more inconsistency to some of these episodes, and I feel like the side plots are a pretty big factor in that, and that I think that we haven't seen a whole lot of just real progression with the story. Like you said, this is not the first time the Homelander's kind of just gone off to do some self exploration and just murdered a bunch of people trying to resolve his inner turmoil that he never really will. But yeah, it makes you wonder where this season is gonna go. In terms of we're halfway done, right? And it
Yeah.
feels like that compared to season three, at least season three, I felt like there was much more of a structure. Like
Yes.
the seed of Soldier Boy was planted pretty early on. Like, okay, yeah, I mean, same thing with the virus. Obviously, we know the virus is gonna come into play, and I'm sure it's gonna end up, they teased January 6th in the first episode. I feel like the season probably is gonna reach its climax with that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I do feel a little shaky during some scenes. Not the episodes individually, but certain plot lines and scenes have definitely been. I feel like maybe I've been dragging the pacing a bit and just can definitely slow it down at times.
Yeah, I guess just kind of my thing is that usually and I guess this is kind of the detriment of being me at the risk of sounding completely full of myself, but I feel like I've been doing this long enough that I can pretty much call it is that when I get a sense of kind of where the story is going and when there's a flow to it, even if I don't necessarily know the ending, right? It's like you were saying, season 3 definitely had much more interesting of a structure, and part of The Boys' charm is the fact that it is very unpredictable. And so you definitely don't know where it's going to go for sure. But what this kind of brings me back to is a lot of how I felt watching season 2. Where season 2, I thought got off to a really, really strong start, immediately picking up
Yeah,
off of that insane cliffhanger that they left us with on season 1. Where season 1, you're like, okay, it's Butcher versus Homelander. This is kind of the final showdown. The other boys, okay, they're on the run, but you don't really know where this is going to go. And then it ends on that massive cliffhanger. And then season 2 comes in, immediately starts to address some of them, and then kind of does this weird thing where it starts to resolve a lot of the storylines early for the sake of moving on to other things. And I thought that the
I
second
noticed
half,
that too. Yeah,
yeah, and I personally felt that the second half of season 2, with the exception of episode 6, which I thought was spectacular, I thought that the second half of season 2 kind of floundered a little bit, and especially with how they
I
resolved
agree.
the church arc. And obviously the reveal of Newman was cool, but kind of how that all went, versus season 3, which definitely felt like, okay, it had a trajectory and a pace. And by the time they brought in Soldier Boy, you're like, oh, I don't know what the hell's going to happen next, but it just kept
Right.
getting more and more and more insane. And this one, we're starting to fall a little bit into the trappings of season 2, I feel, where again, each episode kind of feels like its own singular object. And even though we have a pretty definitive end game where we're heading towards, it feels like they're trying to purposefully mislead us on the way there.
I agree, and I think you bring up a great point with season 2. It felt like, especially maybe like episode 5, 6, like as soon as we found out Stormfront was a Nazi, it felt
Right.
like not a lot happened in between that and then just the finale where they shoved a
Exactly.
whole bunch of stuff in our face.
Exactly. Literally, so the whole thing, right? So Dustin, actually, shout out to him as well. I don't know if he's watching this episode, but Dustin literally called the Stormfront twist when they mentioned Liberty, because they did the same thing that they've done every time, drop the first 3, and then it's one episode week to week. And I think they revealed that she was Liberty in episode 4, I want to say. It was really quick that they revealed it, because I'm pretty sure it was the episode where that was the same episode Grace told Butcher where Becca was being held, and then Huey, Annie, and went on the solo trip in order to interview one of the Stormfront victims in the past, and that basically confirmed that she was Liberty, And I'm like, okay, kind of shot yourself in the foot with the reveal there before you even got a chance to really get going, I mean, So that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. Now they haven't done any major reveals yet. And as far as we'll get that down once we break down the rest of the storylines, but just as far as like the Homelander part of it, right? Where it's like, okay, we need to give Homelander something to do because he is one of the more popular characters. He is one of the most popular and interesting characters. And this is one of those episodes where we just can't have him interacting with the rest of the main cast. Like the rest of the cast, there is some stuff that's there, but I also kind of am starting to have a little bit of problems with the satire because I think I'm it's not there yet, but I feel like it's starting to fall into the camp of, oh, we think we're smarter than we really are. And there's been a lot of stuff that's been falling into that recently. For the most part, The Boys has done a really good job with towing the line between ridiculous satire, but also, not thinking that they're like smarter or above average. And I have a bad feeling we're starting to get there. And I think probably the most glaring example of that is the Firecracker Starlight arc, right? Where we talked about it last episode. It already got off to a rough start when Firecracker revealed that that Annie Starlight bullied her and spread false rumors during the pageant circuit that they did when they were kids.
Her, like, 20 years
and so
later.
she hates her now. And it literally gets to the point where she's setting up a whole like convention outside of her headquarters for the purposes of drawing her out and provoking her to beat her up through a whole host of different things. We're gonna break that down, but I mean the setup. I understand where the storyline is going, and it's all part of Sister Sage's grand plan in order to sow chaos. But I mean, first of all, so Butcher is now back on the team for whatever reason. Don't know how that happened. I'm pretty sure was definitive. Is like, oh, he's out. That's happening. And then he's with Kessler. Tries something with Ryan last episode. That doesn't work. So like,
it
what
feels
gives?
like at least a couple times a season, it feels like Butcher's kind of just always like in and out and just like, oh, what's he do? Like, how many times have you heard them complain about him showing up somewhere again? It's like, yeah, it's like we kind of get it. Like, you should just expect him to be. If there's something going down, just expect him to be there. And
yeah.
I don't know why it's more a ground for conflict than it really is, because nothing ever really happens with it. Like,
right.
I don't know. You never see the characters beef. Like, I mean, just 2 episodes ago, he was kind of telling them all like he was gonna die soon, and
exactly.
Having them. Then he's like, this episode, he's having make him a promise. So I agree. It's a little.
It's flip flopping. It's flip flopping a lot, going back and forth and back and forth. And like for a second, it always throws me off because for me, I'm like, okay, I want to give it the benefit of the doubt. A lot happens in our lives now that we're adults. We don't remember exactly what happens on a given basis, week to week. But like, again, it's like either it's important or it's not. And when you're tricking me into thinking that I missed something important, when in reality you're just making shit up on the fly, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a problem,
Yeah, absolutely. And segueing into that, my biggest kind of problem with this episode was just the just drop out of nowhere about Starlight's abortion. Right.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
I swear there had been zero mention of this beforehand, and then
and
Huey are talking about it like it's this like obviously
right. It literally was gaslighting me for a second where I'm like, I'm struggling hard to remember. I'm like, did that happen and I just missed it, or I like wasn't paying attention?
So,
I pay pretty close attention to these shows. It's only one of like my favorite shows that's on right now.
Exactly. And
so
there was just like talking about like how they've been padding the time, especially with some of these side plots, like with Huey and Frenchie. I mean, did Huey really need to be sitting in the hospital for, his 3 episodes worth of screen time, just kind of wondering about his dad, is he going to be all right, versus like, could they have at least dedicated 5 minutes instead to just him having that conversation with Annie? Like, this could have happened right at the start of the season, and it would have been a much more satisfying emotional payoff for when Annie kind of does lose it, because then we kind of see like she'd been grappling with this, but then it's just boom out of nowhere.
Well, let's set up for it too. So like I said, so Firecracker, because we didn't even also talk about the fact that Firecracker's just a pedophile, and we just kind of just glaze over that. Okay, so let's set it up for the viewing audience, right? So like I said, so it's all part of Sister Sage's grand plan to have Firecracker set up a public talk discrediting Starlight directly across from her headquarters. This is also tied in with the fact that also at the beginning, Annie goes to meet with Singer in order to team up, in order to basically make sure that the constituents end up voting for his anti-Vought legislation that he wants to pass. And then, obviously, like I said, you have the Huey Kimiko subplot as well, but this is the main plot. So basically, MM and Butcher go in to investigate the convention, and they basically manage to get their hands onto some pretty damning evidence revealed that Firecracker had, when she was a counselor at a Christian youth camp, as a 28-year-old, seduced and had sex with a 15-year-old guy, and then threatened to tweet it out. Firecracker tweets it out herself and then goes on a public rant. And again, this is where I'm really, the boys, it is testing me to say the least. Goes on a public rant apologizing for the act and then tries to make it seem like, oh, Starlight's worse because as a 13-year-old, she blinded people in a store trying to use her powers to save people. And then on top of that,
Another thing that's pulled out of
another thing that's just pulled out of the air. And then on top of that, she's an evil person because she got an abortion. And I'm just like, hold on. Wait a second. Hold on. You literally just confessed to being a pedophile, like seducing an underage
honestly,
kid.
I don't even have a huge issue with that because it's obviously, she has her fan base and
part of the satire,
she's
right?
got her own crowd that's going to basically do the work for her and kind of, so she's obviously got her own group of people she's preaching to that are just going to, as long as she can make Starlight the villain in that scenario, like it, obviously we see how it is in the real world. Like it doesn't surprise me that it kind of does work out in her favor. But yeah, I agree. Like from a neutral standpoint, I think the situation's pretty fucked. Like in terms of how they're
just a little bit
portraying that.
Just a little bit. It's like it's one of those instances where it's kind of for the purpose of making the plot progress without it actually feeling natural to the characters, right? And it's kind of again placing the emphasis because again, it's like I'm like, so, because not only does this indict Firecracker as being kind of a moron, which we kind of already knew it, but again, this is supposed to be part of Sage's plan, right? So like her plan, right, is to discredit Starlight, and like it really is testing both. I think I think obviously the audience that's watching this program within the show, obviously we can assume that their relative intelligence is pretty low, but for us, the viewing audience in the real world, the few of us that are left with some rational-minded common sense, I'm just kind of torn where I'm like, is this good satire or is this just bad writing? Because I'm like, I'd like to think of myself as somebody who does a pretty good job with understanding what is good satire versus what isn't. And so that's kind of where I end up getting torn, especially when, again, it's like, it feels more of like, okay, we're being told that Sister Sage is a smart character rather than being shown it, and obviously her efforts in the last couple of episodes seem to kind of prove it. But and as far as framing Starlight, I'm like, just the medical records, and the idea of using it in and of itself, I'm like, okay, that works from a plot standpoint, but from a character standpoint, I don't necessarily know if I'm kind of on board with where this is going. I mean, obviously, again, it serves its purpose, right? It provokes Annie. She attacks Firecracker right in the middle of stage and starts like beating the shit out of her. And again, it works as far as like, lending credence to Sage's plan, ruining Annie's public image so that, Singer wants to publicly distance himself from her, So like I said, the plan works at the end of the day. It's just the steps that we go through to get there. I'm like, we're kind of jumping through a lot of hoops that don't really make a lot of sense here,
I agree. I don't think it was in Sage's plan for Starlight to just, kind of crack like that and attack. I'm sure she was hoping for some kind of reaction, obviously doing it right outside of her headquarters there. But I think it worked out, obviously, a lot more in favor of Sage, the fact that she did kind of snap like that. And I think Sage even heard her say something like that. It was like the first domino to fall or something like that. Something along those lines. And,
exactly.
like that, it's all kind of piecing together for her. That was kind of the break she needed, and now I feel like it's just going to be more and more doubling down. And obviously, we see the army of PR and media people she has at her disposal to kind of wage this info war. So it's it at least feels like it is accomplishing what the plot needs it to do in terms of that added pressure, cracking down on Starlight, who was kind of meant to be the beacon of hope against all the evil and corruptness of Vought and what's happening with the Supes and Homelander and things like that. And it's not working. So
no, it's not.
They're at least keeping up that intensity and that suspense with the show,
and the constant feeling that the good guys are just not going to win ultimately, because it's the real world.
Yeah, and I feel like that and just the unpredictability of Homelander and Anthony Starr's performance has really been carrying this season more than others, just because of kind of the weaker aspects of the subplots and some of the other side characters we've been seeing.
Right. Right. All right. Let's talk about Huey and Kimiko for a minute, and then we'll get to the ending. Those bits of the ending. So Huey and Kimiko, their whole bit. So Huey's mom wants to take his dad off of life support, because he's unfortunately gone brain dead as a result of the stroke. So Huey attempts to, contact A-Train in order to try and have him get some Compound V, and basically attempts to blackmail him as far as being like, listen, you owe me. All of this started because of you. If there's one thing that you can do, you can help save my dad's life. And so A-Train does. He has a very strange encounter with Ashley at the tower, and kind of where that goes. It's like, so you're trying to steal some Compound V, and then Ashley and A-Train's like, oh, you shat in Homelander's toilet. I'm like, really? I'm like, okay, well,
again with just the pulling random things out of
random things out of the hat. And I'm like, man, I'm starting to wonder if you guys are like starting to run out of ideas. Which again, you would never want that to happen on The Boys. This is supposed to be like a well of depravity. But
I would be so interested to see the behind the scenes of this season compared to other seasons, at least in the writing room, and just I wonder if they have too many hands on it at this point, because it's like not even close to being Amazon's like by far their most successful show.
Easily.
I feel like at least with A-Train going into Homeland, like I get it, like Homelander's out, confronting his past in the lab, like whatever. Cool, he's not there. I felt like it was a missed opportunity for A-Train to interact with Ryan, because we didn't even see Ryan.
I agree, honestly. Like, I agree. Yeah, Ryan's not in this episode at all.
Playing video games on the couch or something. I feel like it was a missed opportunity for Ryan to interact with A-Train and because I feel like that would be a really interesting interaction from at least where they are, where like they're both kind of teetering between the sides of Vought and doing the right thing, and I feel like putting them in the same room would have been really interesting to see from our standpoint, and just like how would two people that are kind of on the fence interact like with each other like that. But didn't happen. Whatever. Obviously, classic Ashley, comedic relief moment, but
yep, as she is known for. Yeah. Okay, so here's my next big question, right? So after they meet with A-Train, they're attacked by more Shining Light members. We have another Kimiko gross out gag where Kimiko gets shot with a bazooka and blown in half. What was the point of this sequence? Like, where are we going with the Shining Light arc? Like, I'm actually confused. Like, what is going on here?
Why are they showing up now of all times?
Right,
this
they never showed up before in any of the last couple of years of the Boys operating.
Right, like Kimiko had like a brief flashback in like an episode or two ago of these people, and just knows that they set it up like, oh, she'll probably have to confront them at some point. Like I said, I talked about it last week, but would have been much better to do it like much earlier on than this. And now they're just coming after her. I felt like it was kind of just meant to get her and Huey busy for a little bit, and cool fight scene, whatever. Huey killed a guy. I feel like we didn't really get enough time to process that either. This moment, like Huey kind of
but also, I love how they're trying to make it seem like, oh, this is Huey's like first time like getting like blood on him up close. I'm like, is everybody seeming to forget that he literally blew up Translucent in the second episode of the show? Like, are we forgetting about that? Like, this is not Huey's first rodeo as far as killing people,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like again, I feel like there have been a few missed opportunities from a writing standpoint to really bring out more character development, or more, I guess, interesting ways to explore the themes of the show with the characters by putting them in. It feels like there hasn't been like a lot of as much suspense with the main characters. Obviously, with Homelander, the guy's a ticking time bomb. Any scene that he's in, which I think I think Eric Kripke like tweeted out himself, like, give him the Emmy.
Yeah, give him the Emmy already.
This episode, especially.
Honestly, it's ridiculous that he hasn't even been nominated at all recently, especially like. Okay, like, fine, the Boys doesn't qualify as the typical Emmy fodder, whatever. But like, season 2 still got the drama nomination, but they couldn't nominate, in the COVID year where there was nothing out there, and they still couldn't find room to nominate Urban or Anthony Starr for that season,
which is a travesty.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. All right, so now let's get to the most confusing storyline, where, again, for the life of me, I have no idea where this storyline is going or why it's even here. The Frenchie Colin subplot, where, kind of similar to them just giving it away, Frenchie, after a couple of attempted romantic encounters with Colin, again, don't really know why we're going there with this, He just tells Colin, yeah, it was me. I killed your family. And Colin, like, of course, goes nuts and starts choking him out. The lead up to it is that Colin remembers that the guy who killed his family had bullet marks on his ankles or something. And I'm like, I need to know where this is going. I really do, because we've already spent way more time with the storyline than we frankly should have. I don't know what the point of it is. I don't know where it's going. Like, what I need to know. Somebody please make this make sense to me.
And I like this show, at least I'll give it to this show, at least with these kinds of plot lines, they always find ways to kind of trip things on their head in ways you don't expect, which can be fun. If I had to guess, Colin is maybe going to end up leaking some more stuff on Team Starlight to really kind of, crack down on the pressure and force our characters into a really desperate situation. But you never even know. Maybe it won't even lead to anything. Who even knows at this point?
Right.
But I think, again, just really small missed opportunities from a writing standpoint. Why not at least show Frenchie's scarring a few episodes ago?
Exactly.
If it was that brief, with right, Colin, like they mentioned it much earlier that Frenchie killed his family, obviously still pulling it out of nowhere. Like we it would have been nice if this has been like a family from at least some point in the show beforehand, so it would have been a little more a little more emotionally satisfying. But it's just I feel like they kind of really are just dropping things out of thin air. And the more we've talked about it, the more I've kind of realized, I mean, we've covered like 6 or 7 things they've kind of just dropped on us right out of thin air this episode.
I don't think this is a good episode. I really, really don't, because the more we talk about it, it's like, oh, they dropped the ball with this. Oh, they dropped the ball with that. It's
from
like,
a writing standpoint, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Okay, now let's get to probably, again, the most compelling bit of this episode, and that it feels like the only part of it that actually feels like well thought out, and that's the Butcher stuff at the end. So, obviously, Frenchie gets set after they completely fail the first time in order to try and blackmail Firecracker. They just randomly send in Frenchie after he's almost gotten choked out to investigate the trailer. Ezekiel's there. I haven't seen him in a bit. Ezekiel, of course, finds Frenchie, tries to strangle him. Butcher comes in to the rescue, starts, freezing Ezekiel's limbs in order to beat up. Then he has this moment where he blacks out. Obviously that is also tied in with the opening scene of the episode as well, where he's taking a shower and he blacks out. He's been hallucinating about Becca constantly, and we kind of attribute it to the 10V, but he blacks out in the trailer and he wakes up and he literally discovers Ezekiel in pieces around him. Like, like forget Reese's Pieces, more like Ezekiel pieces. And so he goes back, obviously, then he tails Huey when he goes to get the compound V from A-Train. Huey obviously has his little encounter with A-Train. Again, I feel like another, missed opportunity as far as a writing standpoint, where that's just a brief encounter where Huey's like, okay, they make up, they shake hands, and then Butcher comes out and calls him a twat again. He's like, what are you doing? And Huey's like, oh, well, if you had a chance to take Compound V in order to save your own life, in order to prevent things, would you? And he's like, yeah, I did. It didn't work. And I'm like, oh, so that's what the weird little worm thing that's crawling around under his head is. I thought that was just a symptom of the temp V, Yeah.
But and at least with them dropping this on us again, like another thing that they hadn't mentioned up until this episode, at least with them dropping this on us, it feels at least more in character. Obviously, Butcher's just trying to buy as much time as possible. It makes sense that someone with his connections would be able to get V, even if it was just from Frenchie. Like that, it makes sense that he would have tried this in like the year or so between seasons. So I don't have as much of a problem with that. But
even though they said he only had 6 months to live or something like that
at the start of the season,
at the start of the season,
they told him 18 months.
18 months,
season,
right?
And it had been a year in between.
Right. Okay. I couldn't remember. Again, that was another one of those instances where I'm like, is the boys gaslighting me again? I really feel like I'm going to have to start that. The boys gaslighting.
Probably are, if there's going to be one more season, because it seems like they're keeping pace with the real time. So
exactly. And then the ending sequence, Huey gets back to the hospital. He's about to, he's still not sure whether he can go through with it in order to see his dad take off life support, and here's the weird thing. So obviously, we got the idea at the beginning by seeing, the IV going into his dad's arm to, get the V. But he's not the one that injected his dad with the V, right?
No.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. Again, was this some creative editing? It had to have been his mom, right?
Which,
it had to have been.
That's a twist. That's what I'm talking about, when it's just like little moments that can just lead to much better payoffs. In this scenario, I think it was a good twist, because literally, his mom last episode, it was a throwaway line. It seems like it, but looking back, it makes sense. Oh, I used to work for Vought. She probably had some demons, like this, right?
That's right. Yes.
So I feel like that's such like a really interesting. Like I finally get where this side plot is going now, and how Huey's mom isn't quite what she might seem, and maybe she has ulterior motives for his dad. So
Right.
completely makes sense that this is kind of going the way it is now. I wish it happened maybe a little quicker, but that's
Yeah,
you can call
exactly.
that a
Could have
nitpick,
again
whatever.
could have built up to it. Like I said, we're already at the fact that we're already at the halfway point. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, overall, I will say, like I said, Wisdom of the Ages, it's a typical fourth episode, I will say, because again, if we're looking back at the fourth episodes of the last couple of seasons, like I said, season 2, episode 4 wasn't a big fan of it. Season 3, episode 4 ends with them finding Soldier Boy and him frying the Compound V out of Kamiko's system. So there's that. So, like I said, as far as kind of like setting us up, unfortunately, this one kind of it's going to be what I like to call a boys padding it out episode, really. Where again they are kind of are just padding stuff out for the purpose of for the purpose of kind of prolonging things until they kind of get to the next couple episodes. Will they hopefully be able to reclaim the momentum for the next couple of episodes? We shall see. Also, like I said, continue to drop tiny hints of Gen V in there before we eventually get the major connection. So before we get out of here, any final thoughts and star rating for this episode before we get out of here?
Yeah, I might have to. I mean, final thoughts. I feel like I've pretty much kind of said my piece in terms of I feel like they have been kind of just throwing things up in the air, seeing what sticks, almost like you said, tricking us into believing some things that they just hadn't built up in any shape, way, or form before. I'm probably going to have to go like a 3 or a 3.5 on this one. And that's frankly only because of Anthony Starr's performance and is pretty much single-handedly carrying that by like 2 stars. So
yeah, literally, I'll give you that. It's that the rest of the episode in and of itself is like between a 2.5 and a 3, just because, like I said, I think it's the twist with Huey's mom at the end, the butcher stuff at the end, and really just Anthony Starr's performance that like continues to elevate it. Like Anthony Starr, he is the reason to watch this show, and like I really, really hope that when his tenure on The Boys is done, he's able to turn that around and do some interesting work with it. Really,
I feel like he's like another, Bryan Cranston in the making, or some kind of big name.
He's kind of the next in the line of the anti-hero phase. It's like it's Tony Soprano, it's Walter White, to a certain extent, it's Stringer Bell. It's bad guys that we love to hate. It's Logan Roy, and now it's Homelander. That's kind of where Saul Goodman I would throw in there as well because of Better Call Saul. So yeah, that's what I would say. All right. So with that being said, people, like I said, that is it for our boys recap. Like I said, last week was a little long because we had 3 episodes to hit. These episodes going forward will probably be a little bit shorter as we've only got like 1 episode to hit until the finale in 4 weeks from now. Like I said, Eli and I will be back on Sunday night recapping House of the Dragon season 2 episode 2. What is going on, guys? We are back. It is another episode of the House of the Dragon recap show on the Talking TV podcast. I am here with Eli Holicky once again, as well as a couple of like guest hosts that are kind of circling around in the background. We're all with friends here is the point. Eli, episode 2. So we had a slight kerfluffle because I was looking over. HBO did not have the name of this episode. None of the websites, Wikipedia. The name of this episode is currently unknown right now. So I have titled it Brothers in Arms. So I just wanted your thoughts before we got into the episode.
No, I love it. I think that's very poetic. 2 thumbs up from me.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good. And with that being said, people, we are here to talk about season 2, episode 2 of House of the Dragon, Brothers in Arms. Stay tuned.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents. Anything to make his feckless reign appear to have purpose. What are we going to do about it?
Did you really think that you could just fly about the realm, trying to steal my brother's throne?
Innocent make us kings. Dragons did.
All right, guys. Season 2, episode 2, Brothers in Arms. I mean, damn, there's a lot to break down. There's a lot to break down here. I mean, we have, in a strange way, kind of a repeat of what happened last week. We've got another big fallout from a pretty major death that happened at the end of last episode. There's some more intrigue, but the way that I kind of categorize this is I kind of categorize this as as just character building. That's what this is, Rear. I don't know why it took such a long build up with that. That's simply purely what this is. Eli,
No, I
your
completely
initial
agree.
thoughts on this?
I honestly thought this episode was a significant step up from last week. I thought just between the character dynamics, just in terms of the acting performances too, I thought was a very large improvement. We're really moving forward with the war. I obviously, like we said, lines have been crossed. I don't really think we can go back from either side. And it was kind of nice to see the different parallels between the two sides with Aegon and Rhaenyra, and kind of seeing them all kind of grapple with keeping support in their own quarters when it comes to the war. And it was they both obviously kind of had a bit of a betrayal moment, right, with Aegon and Otto and Rhaenyra and Daemon, and they're both kind of I really liked how it kind of lined up their arcs this way. It was very cool.
Yeah, definitely. And for anybody who's actually watching this and is wondering what's going on in the background, Eli just has like a bunch of like random kids just like in the background that just will never stop when it comes to just messing around. So just so that everybody understands that. Yeah, my thoughts on this episode, man, this is a good fucking episode. This is a really, really, really good fucking episode. Like, it was just everything. It's kind of crazy because like I was totally expecting more of the dragon action, especially after kind of the setup, because, you know, after the first episode, they always give you the trailer for like what's going to happen for like the rest of the season. And now it's like, no, this was much more so like another like calm character building. I'm really impressed, honestly, despite like kind of the promise of action, how much character building is going on here. It's actually really, really impressive. I love the interactions between all of the characters in this. You know, it starts off as a significantly green-centered episode, but we get a lot of good black section as well. You know, the moment between Rhaenyra and Daemon at the beginning, I thought was a particular highlight, and really just all the other little moments too. You know, Jason Bayla, what's it called? Rhaenyra and Bayla, honestly, Corlys and Rhaenys. Some interactions as well from the new characters. We get the introduction of another one of the dragons in this episode, Alan's brother Adam of Hull, and we get a little tease as far as what's going to happen there. It probably one of my favorite scenes of the episode. Obviously, the moments between Otto and Alicent Hightower are always incredible, but then of course this episode begins the Criston Cole Aegon relationship as well. You know, and famously we get another big sequence and a direct fallout from the blood and cheese moment last episode. Well, get out of here. And for the blood and cheese moment from last week, as well as you know, some added scenes as well, you know, some more added sequences. You know, what we love about House of the Dragon is that they're taking fire and blood, but they're adding more to it as well. And of course, the major event that ended this, that being the duel of the twins. Honestly, I mean, it was everything we were hoping for, and it was just absolutely perfect. So Eli, first and foremost, you know, obviously we're going to kind of break down the plot of this episode, but first and foremost, just I want to know what your favorite character moment and interaction in this episode was, and why you thought it was like the most impactful.
Oh gosh, honestly, that's a pretty difficult decision, which I guess is a good thing because we really got rewarded with a lot of really good character moments. If I had to guess, I think Otto Hightower was a pretty big standout for me this episode. I think we really kind of saw how cold he was in terms of just his decision making, where it's just he's almost without emotion when it comes to doing the things that he does and trying to basically control the kingdom. Obviously, Aegon isn't really let's face it, he's not really the smartest guy ever in the room, and so Otto, I can kind of almost understand Otto's frustration, where it's obviously characters want one thing, but I think really when his anger really came out with Aegon was probably my favorite moment, at least with their dynamic, and obviously leading to Aegon, you know, dismissing him as the Hand. I think is going to have some huge lasting consequences on the rest of the story. So.
Well, that's a big moment, obviously, from the narrative, specifically this section of Fire and Blood, is famously Aegon becoming very dissatisfied with Otto Hightower's more tactile approach to the role of Hand as the King, and then obviously replaces him with Criston Cole, who is somebody who's much more so of a lackey, somebody who's much more willing to do Aegon's bidding, you know, rather than take the smart approach. So yeah, and so the fact that we kind of got that moment in episode 2 is kind of cool. It means that they're continuing with the breakneck pace as far as moving forward with the story. You know, they are what's it called? You know, they're not kind of wavering or wasting time. They're introducing new characters and still going along at a pace that's necessary as far as setting up, especially when it comes to the new characters. But as far as the overarching kind of story and episode itself, I think, yeah, it's doing exactly what it needs to do. Like I said, there's a lot of setup that happens in this. Yeah, that just happened. Oh man, I love how this stream is going. So obviously, you know, the big moment that kind of kicks this off, right? The big funeral procession that results, you know, we see the direct fallout from Jaehaerys' death in the last episode. Aegon kind of freaking out. And you get kind of, you know, Otto once again just autoing, where it's like, we have to lay our plans out. We have to make sure that we use this to our advantage with the commoners. You know, we have to make sure that they are on our side, that this can be blamed on Rhaenyra as a political maneuver, and that everything that will proceed from here will directly benefit us. And then obviously we cut over to Dragonstone. We have Rhaenyra kind of taking the innocent stand, because again, unlike what happened in Fire and Blood, you've got Rhaenyra completely in surprise. She was not aware that Daemon did this. Of course, she finds out later on, because it's pretty obvious. Because the only thing that's worse than Daemon, like, making plans in a room, is Daemon not saying anything in a room. That's kind of horrifying, honestly. And yeah, so kind of just that initial opening sequence. What were your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I think it was very in character for both. I mean, obviously Rhaenyra had nothing to do with the events that happened last episode, and you know, obviously the betrayal. I really do how like convincing Daemon seemed in his kind of denial of him giving the order, which obviously we know he did. And I mean, Rhaenyra really knows him at this point, and I think just the acting, the betrayal that you could really hear in her voice. It was honestly a great moment, and just, I mean, yeah, kind of very similar to Aegon and Otto. Just don't mind that. You know, we see that there's just you know, there's I think a line that's been crossed, and I really don't think that they're ever really going to have that full trust of each other. And yeah, I mean, it was a very good argument. I mean, I really understood. I feel like you really understood the arguments of both sides.
You know what's hilarious about everything that's going on behind Eli right now is the fact that it actually sort of is contributing to the spirit of this discussion, because of all the smoke in there, you know? So it kind of works, guys. So in a way, keep doing that, you know? But yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just from an acting standpoint, like what made it's my favorite thing that kind of happened to David Fincher movies, which is that in Fincher movies, the thing that Fincher always says when it comes to his approach to different actors is that both actors have to be right in every scenario, because that's the only thing that's going to make the argument compelling. And that's exactly what made this compelling, because Rhaenyra is 100% right about everything. She knows that Daemon has been blatantly lying to her. She knows that Daemon is simply using her to further his own interests, but Daemon is also right in the sense of he's right that Viserys ultimately was weak and ultimately did let people kind of walk all over him, and kind of in a way is not wrong in the sense of Rhaenyra, of Viserys declaring Rhaenyra his heir as a way to punish Daemon as well, you know? And so kind of that kind of leads to a fault. Will, get out of here. And that kind of does lead to, you know, kind of this irreparable rift between the two of them. You know, they're still ultimately fighting for the same side, but they ultimately have different goals. And that leads to Daemon flying away on Caraxes, presumably to Harrenhal. I thought we were going to get Harrenhal in this episode, but apparently they're saving that for next episode. And yeah, and that kind of leads to what I call just a series of discussions afterwards, where ultimately it's you know, they manage to catch blood, and Aegon tortures him and ultimately gets the information that he needs, and then obviously which leads to, you know, them murdering all of the rat catchers. You also have the next introduction of one of the new characters. We met Alan of Hull last week, and now we meet his brother Adam of Hull, like I was talking about last week. And these two are rumored to be the bastard sons of Corlys Velaryon, which explains his connection to them. And what's it called? The important thing about Adam, as is hinted at later on in the episode, you know, him and Alan have kind of like a playful relationship. You can tell which one's, you know, one's more so the serious one, and the other one is more so the jokey comedic one. And the thing that's cool about Adam that's introduced in this episode is that, you know, we see Sea Smoke flying around, as we were told. Sea Smoke's still flying around our Driftmark, and for those Fire and Blood fans, they know, you know, Adam is going to become one of the Dragon Seeds. He's gonna board Sea Smoke, and he's going to become a very, very important player in the game going forward. So those kind of sequence of events, you know, that kind of transpired right there, you know, the introduction of Adam and all that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously, having read the book, Adam is definitely going to be someone very significant in terms of how the story progresses. I thought, honestly, he seems like a very interesting character. You hear about him in the book. Obviously, actually looking at him on the screen is a totally another thing. He's a little different than how I would imagine him, but I think it looks like it's going to be a very good actor for the role, and I'm very excited to see what happens.
Yeah, Marcus, get out of there. Yeah, yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's yeah, I'm excited. I like how they're introducing the new characters. I really do, because we get Hugh again in this episode, Hugh Hammer, who we were introduced to last episode. We have Adam now, so that's 2 of the dragon scenes, and we get a third one as well, obviously, in the famous hanging of the rat catchers scene. We have the introduction of the third dragon scene, Ulf the White, obviously, who boards and rides Silverwing as well. So we have all of that kind of, laying the groundwork for, so there's a lot of that going on, obviously attributing as well to the fact that the episodes are kind of, pretty long for the most part. Last week's episode was, I believe, 65 minutes, and this episode is 72 minutes, I want to say. So we're getting into like the hour and a half episode long territory, because that's only 10 minutes shorter than the longest episode of last season, which is The Long Night, which clocked in at 82 minutes. And so obviously the next couple sequences that we have, Jason Bela conversing, kind of regarding each other about their parents. Bela being recruited by Rhaenyra in order to go and fly around. Oh my God. What's it called? Be recruited to fly around on in order to patrol King's Landing. And ultimately shit, where was I going with this? Don't worry, I'll get back on track. And ultimately, the decision, or probably one of the biggest parts of the second half of the episode, her her discussion with Mysaria ultimately, and kind of where that goes. So, what were your thoughts on on Mysaria and her usage on this episode?
Yeah, it was pretty typical for what I came to expect for her. I mean, it makes sense that Rhaenyra would try and okay, they just keep moving the camera. It makes sense that Rhaenyra would try and get as many answers as she could out of her. Frankly, it's honestly, I really liked that she dug as deep as she did in terms of her past relationship with Daemon. I thought it was very emotional. I thought that was a huge difference between this week and last week's episode. Was you could really feel the emotion between a lot of the conversations and the characters, probably because just a lot of them are kind of at their breaking point, which makes for some really tense moments, which we kind of see them do some rash things. And I thought the conversation was very cool.
Well, it's so interesting because of Mysaria's kind of, weird arc. She went from being Daemon's concubine to sort of like a master of whisperers figure. I think that, it's funny. I compared her last week, as far as like, between her and Larys Strong, right? Those two have kind of taken the parts of the Littlefinger and Varys of this section of the universe. And now it's kind of clear who takes whose part. I would say Larys Strong is much more so the Littlefinger with elements of Varys, but Mysaria definitely has more of Varys in her ultimately, while also having elements of Melisandre as well, kind of that overarching role. So kind of, it's interesting seeing her connection with Rhaenyra now, as somebody who, she explained her case to Daemon last week. Now she's explaining it to Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra, if I had to guess, senses sort of a kinship in her, kind of understanding her position is, she's a survivor. She had to fight and claw for everything that she has. And ultimately kind of the position that she garnered was one that she was not going to give up. So ultimately kind of, even though that arc, I don't really see as, kind of fulfilled necessarily. I think it was kind of a brilliant bit of character kind of reworking that I thought was really good. And just as well, the Jason Bela and then the Bela and Rhaenyra scenes as well. What were your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I thought same thing. Okay, I will.
Well, get out of there.
He's okay. So Jason Bela, I thought also some pretty interesting moments. I wasn't as invested in kind of their portion of the story, but it's very interesting to kind of see what the effects of last episode has been having on them. And Yeah, I'd say it's. Sorry, I'm a little distracted at the moment. If you couldn't tell, and
Yeah.
there's things flying all over the room.
Yeah, definitely. Don't worry.
Yeah.
We got you from there. Yeah. So as far as kind of the rest of the episode goes, ultimately, I would say that what's it called? I would say that probably as far as Jason Bela go, I'm actually kind of I don't know. It's weird because I feel like that's a scene that I should normally hate, but I actually really kind of do enjoy it. It's kind of heartwarming still seeing like those brief moments of innocence that are able to make it through. You know, I'm particularly a fan of, you know, the fact that it's like, you know, they can both bond over like, you know, oh, we both have trauma growing up, you know, because the one had to grow up with Damon as a father, and the other one grew up with a father one father who he thought he had, and then his real father, who was kind of always there, also kind of taking care of him and raising him. And so then so I like that conflict. And then also kind of, you know, I asked for it last week and now I got it this week, much more of Aemond. Oh man, this was an Aemond episode to say the least. I mean, first with the, you know, with the older Madame that he kind of talked to last season when he was looking for Aegon, to what's it called? To what was the other moment? To oh man, there was one other moment that to him finding the coin in the beginning. Ultimately, I thought that was really fascinating as well. But I don't know. I like spending these close little intimate moments with Aemond because he's such a fascinating, strange character. And I don't know. There's something about the way that like Ewan Mitchell portrays him, like just that sneer, but also that cold silence that just he's very, very intimidating to say the least. So yeah, like I said, the two big moments of Cat this episode though are kind of, we have another Otto blow up after Aegon's decision to hang all the rat catchers, like I said, where we also get the introduction of Ulf, and ultimately results in Aegon stripping Otto Hightower of his Hand of the King status and gifting it to Sir Criston Cole, who, as we know earlier, has dispatched Sir Eric. Now that I know which twin kind of serves which side now, Sir Eric to kill Rhaenyra, which of course results in Cole, you know, gaining gaining the Hand of the King status. So he gets a nice little promotion there. Right as Rhaenyra frees Mysaria, Sir Eric, arrives on Dragonstone, attempting to impersonate his brother. Gets almost far enough, at least into the chambers of Rhaenyra as she's attempting to go to bed. But unfortunately, the other twin catches them in time, and we get the infamous duel of the twins, which was just, oh man, this is as awesome as it gets when it comes to Game of Thrones one-on-one sword fights. I realized that like there aren't actually that many sword fights in the original Game of Thrones fight. There's Ned versus, and I realized that most of them involve Jaime. There's Ned versus Jaime in the first season. Then there's Jaime versus Brienne. Jon Snow's got a couple good ones that get in there, but there really aren't as many good sword fights as time goes on ultimately. And so so I knew that we were getting Duel of the Twins in this episode, and honestly, it was everything that we wanted. It's in the title. It's kind of like, you know, this theme of like, you know, one can't survive without the other. It's a little Harry Potter-esque, but it works ultimately. So, what's it called? With that being said, Eli, your thoughts on Duel of the Twins and Otto Hightower's Otto Hightower's ultimate dismissal.
Yeah, I know. I heard you talked about Otto's kind of big blow up, which I thought was the highlight of the episode. Believe it or not the Battle of the Twins. But then again, obviously, I kind of knew that the battle was coming. It happened a little differently than it did in the books. You actually got a little more detail than what actually ended up happening. I really did like how it went, and you could kind of see the pain with both of them, and you know the very conflicting feelings they had. That you know they both were so torn between the allegiances of the two, the king and the queen, that basically kind of drove them to the end. And obviously, I really liked how not Arik, but the other one,
Sir Eric. Very
Eric,
not confusing names.
No, not at all. I thought the ending was very fitting for the both of them, even though they never really got a whole lot of screen time. They definitely each had their own pretty unique arcs that both kind of came together in the end in a really cool and, in my opinion, satisfying way.
Yeah, I agree. It couldn't have gone better, honestly, if you ask me. It's kind of insane, especially given that those are two characters that really didn't come in until the last bit, and it kind of worked out, honestly. I was actually really, really impressed with how that went. And so, kind of, unfortunately, we did have to say goodbye to those two, even though we didn't get to spend that much time with them. But honestly, it worked out pretty well, honestly. I very, very much enjoyed my time with those two, kind of their own individual respective arcs across really that one episode and then this one. And now ultimately, the twins are no more. It kind of did work out, honestly, because no matter, even if one twin did survive, I never would have trusted that it was the good one, so it's kind of fitting that they both had to die in that sense. And then ultimately, it ends with, what's it called? It ends with the infamous, the last sex scene between Sir Kristen and Alicent. What's it called? Before we kind of end with that scene, I did just want to give a couple of shout outs to some really good performances in this episode. Obviously, for me, Tom Glenn-Carney continues to impress as Aegon, but also I wanted to give a shout out to Fia Sabin as Helena. I really, really think that she's solid and very underrated in her part, especially since Helena is somebody who has so little to do. Obviously, Rhys Ifans continues to fucking amaze as Otto Hightower. Fabian Frankel is just absolutely disgusting as Kristen Cole, but in such a interesting and slimy way. And Olivia Cook never gets the respect or attention that she deserves for her performance as Alicent. That's great. Ewan Mitchell continues to terrify. I'm literally just listing off people. And what's called? I'm also really, really interested to see how Clinton Liberty does going forward as Adam of Hull. Eli, any performances you want to shout out before we discuss that final scene between Kristen and Alicent?
Yeah, I mean, actually, kind of leading into it, I'd say Kristen is probably my other shining star of the episode. He very much is just kind of a character you love to hate. I know he's not in the exact same role, but he does kind of give me Littlefinger vibes in terms of how slimy he is as a character, and he really is a piece of shit at times. And apologies for what's going on in the background, but yeah, I've always liked Kristen Cole as a character, not obviously not as a person, but I think he serves his role very well, and the actor does a great job portraying him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like a perfect lead into the last bit of the episode, which obviously is Sir Kristen and Alicent, kind of chopping it up together. It's definitely not as more of like a docile scene, especially since Alicent was pretty much like made it clear it's like, oh, we can't do this anymore. But it's clear these two are like just attracted to each other. Obviously, there's like a different layer of meaning as well for the two of them, considering that considering that Sir Kristen is, very action oriented as far as, his attempt to assistance at Aegon, which of course is an extension of Alicent's greater overall, So basically as an extension of Alicent's overall, kind of attempt to protect her son. And this is kind of like, Sir Kristen kind of is taking the spot of Viserys ultimately, because Viserys ultimately did not spend as much time in his life with Alicent's children as he probably should have. So kind of Sir Kristen as that surrogate father role, it makes sense that, Alicent would end up, shacking up with him. So really, I mean, it's just an excuse for them to put in more sex scenes, but honestly, it kind of is impactful as far as the story goes. So Eli, before we get out of here, before we wrap up tonight's episode and all of the absolute lunacy that's happening behind you, for everybody that has been watching us on YouTube and Twitch, I'm so sorry that you guys have had to deal with it. Hopefully you were at the very least entertained. I think the view count kind of speaks for itself. But Eli, anything else you want to mention before we wrap up and get out of here?
I just want to mention that they keep trying to move my chair or the table, and it's been a huge inconvenience. I'm honestly surprised I've stayed as focused as I have. But no, honestly, I think this episode was fantastic. Really, I think is one of the best ones of the show so far. As long as they keep up this at the pace and the kind of the moments we're getting with each episode, I think this season can top the last one.
Couldn't agree more, ultimately. So, Eli, before we get out of here, would you plug yourself? And if possible, have all the idiots behind you plug themselves as well.
Yeah, so if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram at E_Holicky, like it's spelled on the screen, 45. That is E_Holicky 45. Do any of you gentlemen want to drop your socials at all? You got a couple people here. This is Will. At Will Hooman on Instagram. Yep. That's they're all
right. That's a no on Loudon. That's a no on
right,
Milo.
they're
Eli,
talking quite a bit.
thank you for having me, thanks for coming as well. I can't even speak as far as what's going on. People, we will be back next Sunday for the episode 3 recap for House of the Dragon. Like I said, we're going to keep this coming every week, but we'll be back first on Thursday for the recap of episode 5 of The Boys. Hopefully Eli will be in a quieter setting then. This has been one of the most interesting streams that I've ever been a part of. As far as myself, you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talking TV Podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually lost subscribers for this, but honestly, if we gained them, I also wouldn't be mad as well. Follow us on Twitch if you're not watching this already. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week, or rather on Thursday. We'll see you guys on both for House of the Dragon and The Boys recaps.
The hours following King Viserys' death.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents. Anything to make his feckless flame appear to have purpose.
What are we going to do about it?
Did you really think that you could just fly about the realm, trying to steal my brother's throne?
Instantly make us king.